What is esotericism? The word esoteric basically means secret or hidden. It refers to knowledge or teachings meant for a limited inner circle of people rather than the general public. Scholars today use the term Western esotericism to group together many mystical, occult and magical ideas and movements that developed in Western society. These range from ancient philosophies to occult sciences like alchemy and astrology. But defining exactly what counts as esoteric, or even what counts as Western, is tricky. One challenge is that what we now label as esoteric was not always considered fringe or secret. For example, astrology, which many today see as a mystical or occult practice, was once part of mainstream science. In medieval times, astrology was regarded as a serious science, essentially a branch of astronomy. Universities taught it, and doctors consulted the stars for medical decisions. So the line between ordinary knowledge and esoteric knowledge has shifted over time. Practices like alchemy or astrology only later became viewed as strange or hidden. Originally, they were simply part of learned knowledge. Another issue is deciding what Western means in this context. Does it include only Christian and European traditions, or do Jewish and Islamic mysticism count as well? Historically, some scholars defined Western esotericism in a narrow way, focusing mostly on European Christian occult traditions. In fact, an influential modern encyclopedia of esotericism, published in 2005, deliberately left out Jewish Kabbalah and Islamic mystical currents from its definition of the West. The editors admitted this was a pragmatic choice, to keep their scope manageable, but it shows a bias. It made it seem like only Christian or classical pagan traditions formed Western esotericism. As a result, Jewish mystical traditions and Islamic Sufi traditions were often treated as other, and not part of the main narrative of Western esoteric history. Today, however, scholars are rethinking this divide. They argue that Jewish and Islamic mysticism absolutely influenced Western esoteric ideas and should be considered part of the story. In this essay, we'll be focusing on one of those often underappreciated foundations of Western esotericism, early Jewish mysticism. Before diving in, it's worth noting that what we call esoteric now was often intertwined with religion and philosophy in the past. The boundaries are fuzzy. So when we explore early Jewish mysticism, we are looking at traditions that were certainly mystical and secretive, but also deeply embedded in the religious thought of their time. These ancient Jewish mystical teachings would later help shape the Western esoteric heritage, even if they originated in a Jewish context outside of what some define as the West. Long before the rise of Kabbalah, the well-known medieval Jewish mystical system, there existed a rich body of Jewish mystical lore. Scholars often refer to this phase as Merkabah mysticism. Merkabah or Merkavah means chariot in Hebrew. It flourished roughly between 100 BCE and 1000 CE. The name chariot mysticism comes from the vision of a divine chariot throne described in the biblical book of Ezekiel, chapter 1, a vision of God riding a wheeled throne supported by fantastic angelic creatures. Early Jewish mystics were fascinated by this image. They sought to experience for themselves a journey to the heavenly throne of God, akin to Ezekiel's vision. This tradition is also called Hekhalot literature, palaces literature, because many of the writings involve the mystic ascending through multiple heavenly palaces or temples to reach the divine presence. To set the stage, here are some of the key texts and themes of early Jewish mysticism before the emergence of formal Kabbalah in the 12th to 13th centuries. Merkabah Hekhalot literature. This is a collection of writings from roughly the 2nd to 8th centuries CE describing visionary ascents into heaven. The mystic, often portrayed as an ancient rabbi, undertakes a dangerous journey through the 7 heavens or palaces to finally behold God's throne. These texts are full of dazzling imagery, gigantic angels, fiery chariots, and secret doorways. One prominent example is Hekhalot Rabbati, Greater Palaces, where Rabbi Ishmael is guided through the heavens. Another is 3 Enoch, also called Sefer Hekhalot or Book of Palaces, which tells how the biblical figure Enoch ascended and was transformed into the high angel Metatron. The goal in these texts is often to stand in the presence of God in the highest heaven. Because these writings involve exploring spiritual realms that were not openly discussed, they were considered esoteric or secret teachings, shared only among the initiated. Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Formation. This is an ancient mystical text that is shorter and more philosophical. Sefer Yetzirah describes how God created the universe through combinations of the 32 primordial paths of wisdom, which consist of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet and 10 numbers, or sephirot. It's written in very cryptic poetic language and likely dates somewhere between the 3rd and 6th centuries CE. Scholars debate the exact date. In Jewish legend, it was even attributed to the biblical patriarch Abraham, though in reality it had multiple authors and versions over time. Sefer Yetzirah is extremely important because it introduced ideas like the creative power of letters and the concept of sephirot that later Kabbalah would develop further. In a sense, it's a proto-Kabbalistic work. Unlike the Hekhalot Ascent texts, Sefer Yetzirah doesn't describe heavenly journeys. Instead, it reads more like a manual of cosmic principles and even hints at meditative practices. Its influence on Western esotericism is seen in how later occultists, both Jewish and non-Jewish, were fascinated by using letters, numbers, and divine emanations in their mystical systems. Sar Torah, literature. Sar Torah means Prince of the Torah. These texts are more on the practical mystical side, what we might even call magical. They teach rituals for summoning an angel, specifically an angelic Prince of Torah, who will reveal to the mystic the deepest secrets and interpretations of the Torah, the Holy Scripture. In stories, ancient rabbis are described conjuring the angel Sar Torah, often identified with Metatron or Yephaphiah, to gain supernatural knowledge and memory of the Torah. In other words, the mystic performs certain rites and recitations to compel the angel to appear and teach them. This practice was like an early form of what later became known as practical Kabbalah, using esoteric means to achieve effects in the world or in one's understanding. The Sar Torah texts show that the line between mystical experience and magical ritual was very thin. They are closely related to the Hekhalot writings. In fact, some scholars think these angelic invocation practices were just as central to early Jewish mysticism as the heavenly ascent visions. These early Jewish mystical works form a foundational layer of Western esotericism, because they preserved and developed the idea that there are hidden, higher truths in the universe about God, creation, angels, the soul, that one can access through special means. Later, in medieval times and the Renaissance, Kabbalah emerged directly from these roots, and Christian scholars in the West also became fascinated by Kabbalah as part of the occult sciences. But to truly understand Western esoteric ideas, one must go back to these Merkabah mystics and early Kabbalists who set the stage. Now let's explore some key concepts and themes in this early Jewish mysticism and see how it blurred the lines between mysticism and magic, introduced unique symbolic imagery, and influenced later thought. In modern terms, we often think of mysticism as the pursuit of direct contact or union with the divine, for example, a profound spiritual vision or enlightenment, whereas magic is seen as the attempt to control spiritual forces or the natural world through rituals and spells. In the context of early Jewish mysticism, however, the line between mysticism and magic is not clear-cut at all. The texts and practices contain elements of both. It's perhaps best to say they are mystical texts that freely use magical techniques. For instance, the practitioners of Merkabah mysticism did use rituals, incantations, and secret names of God as part of their method to achieve a heavenly vision. Fasting, chanting hymns, and invoking divine names were meant to induce an ecstatic state in which the mystic's soul could ascend through the heavens. These are magical or theurgical practices, theurgy meaning rituals to invoke the divine, yet the goal was mystical, to encounter God's presence. In the Sar Torah texts, as noted, a mystic might recite powerful adjurations commanding spells to compel an angel to appear. Is that magic? Yes, but the purpose was to gain divine knowledge, a mystical illumination about Torah. In other words, magic was used in service of mysticism. One scholar describes that from the very beginning, magic and theurgy were integral to this school of ecstatic mystics. There was no sharp division like we might make today. To better understand what makes these texts mystical, consider three hallmarks of mysticism that appear repeatedly in early Jewish esoteric literature. 1. Visionary experience. The mystics seek a direct vision of heavenly realms or of God's glory. This could be an ascent through multiple heavens, seeing angelic beings, or witnessing the divine throne. The experience is often described in the first person, "I saw," and is awe-inspiring and transformative. 2. Secret knowledge or instruction. Along with visions, the mystic often receives special teachings. This might be an angel revealing cosmic secrets, the interpretation of Torah, or the structure of creation. The content is esoteric wisdom that isn't available in ordinary study. It must be revealed from above. For example, the angel in a Sar Torah ritual teaches the mystic new insights or even magical formulas. 3. Divine transformation. Contact with the divine can change the mystic. In Merkabah accounts, there is a real risk and reward to ascending so close to God. Some texts describe the mystic being physically or spiritually transformed, even turned into a being of fire or light, as they enter God's presence. The clearest example is Enoch, a human who was transformed into the angel Metatron, essentially becoming part of the divine court. Not every mystic turns into an angel, but many are said to acquire a kind of radiant spiritual status, wearing a crown of light, etc., after completing the journey. So while these ancient Jewish texts involve what we might call magic, spells, summons, use of holy names, their ultimate aim and outcome align with mysticism, experiencing the divine and gaining wisdom from it. The blurriness is actually part of their character. These mystics didn't see magic and religion as opposites. Everything was part of a continuum of sacred knowledge. Having laid the foundation for understanding early Jewish mysticism, Part 2 will dive deeper into the symbolism and practices found in the Hekhalot literature, exploring how mystics navigated the heavenly palaces and interacted with divine beings. Thank you for watching.